4 bullets tore through the night air, close enough to shatter glass but calculated not to kill. Caleb Morgan stood on his ranch porch, rifle raised, while beside him a woman he'd met only 3 days ago returned fire with deadly precision. She wasn't the bride he'd been expecting. She wore a revolver instead of a wedding dress, carried secrets instead of hope, and had brought armed men to his doorstep, men who believed she was hiding something worth killing for. This wasn't the life he'd written those letters for. But when she looked at him through the gun smoke and asked if he was afraid, Caleb realized fear had nothing to do with what happened next. Welcome to a story of deception, survival, and unexpected choices in the untamed West. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The September heat still clung to Cedar Ridge even as evening settled over the town like dust on old leather. Caleb Morgan stood at the edge of the platform, his hat pulled low against the amber sun, watching the stagecoach route with the same steady patience he used for everything else in his life. Thursday. It was always Thursday. For 6 months now he'd been coming to this spot. Not out of desperation, though loneliness had carved its share of hollow spaces in his chest. Not out of romance either, though the letters had been tender in their way. He came because he'd made a promise, and Caleb Morgan kept his word the way other men kept their land, with quiet, unshakable certainty. The town moved around him with familiar rhythms. Mrs. Henderson swept the boardwalk outside her general store. 2 boys chased a hoop down the dusty street. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady percussion. Cedar Ridge wasn't much, maybe 300 souls if you counted the outlying ranches, but it was honest. People worked. They minded their business. They didn't ask questions that didn't concern them. That suited Caleb just fine. He'd bought the Morgan Ranch 5 years back with money saved from years of breaking horses and trailing cattle from Texas to Kansas. The land wasn't prime, rocky in places, prone to flash floods in the draws, but it had water, grass, and enough timber to build what he needed. He'd worked it alone, rising before dawn and falling into bed after dark, building something that mattered even if no one else saw its value. But a ranch needed more than one pair of hands to thrive. And a man needed more than work to call something a life. The letters had started in March. Not his idea, his neighbor Ruth had suggested it after bringing him dinner for the 4th time that month, clearly worried he'd forget how to talk to another human being. "There's women back east who want what you have here," she'd said. "Open sky, clean air, a man who works honest." "Don't know what I'd say to a woman from the city," he'd replied. "Then write it down. Words come easier on paper." He dismissed it at first. But that night, sitting alone in his cabin with nothing but the wind for company, he'd pulled out paper and pen. The words had come slowly, awkwardly. He wasn't educated in the formal sense. His schooling had ended at 12 when his father died and he'd started working, but he could read, write, and figure numbers well enough. He'd written about the ranch, the horses, the way morning looked over the north pasture. He hadn't tried to make it pretty, just true. When Margaret Hale's first letter arrived 6 weeks later, he'd read it 3 times before believing it was real. She wrote from Philadelphia. A seamstress with steady work but shallow roots. Her mother had passed 2 winters back, her father before that. She had a sister married to a banker, comfortable but cold. Margaret's words painted a picture of someone competent, practical, but searching for something the city couldn't provide. She didn't romanticize the West. She asked real questions. What kind of winters? How far to town? Was the work truly as hard as people said? Caleb answered every question honestly. Yes, winters could kill you if you weren't careful. 10 miles to town, manageable on horseback, harder by wagon. The work never stopped, but it was the kind that left you tired, not empty. They wrote through spring and summer. Her letters grew longer, more personal. She told him about sitting on her fire escape at night, watching smoke rise from 1,000 chimneys, feeling surrounded but alone. He told her about watching thunderstorms roll across the plains, feeling small but connected to something larger than himself. By late August, she'd written the words that changed everything. "I'll come in September. If you'll have me, I'll come." He'd read that letter a dozen times, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the end of loneliness. He'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing, fixed the sagging porch boards, bought a new quilt from Mrs. Henderson, blue with white stars, expensive but worth it. Shaved his beard shorter than he'd worn it in years, though he'd kept enough to look like himself. He wasn't trying to be someone else, just the best version of who he was. The stagecoach was late. Caleb pulled his watch from his vest pocket. 6:15. The Thursday coach usually arrived by 6. Not unheard of for it to run behind. Could be weather, could be a wheel, could be nothing at all, but his stomach tightened anyway. Still waiting on that bride of yours, Morgan? Caleb turned to see Sheriff Tom Brennan approaching, thumbs hooked in his belt. Tom was a good man, competent, but not overly ambitious, which made him perfect for Cedar Ridge. They'd shared whiskey a few times, played cards occasionally. Not friends exactly, but friendly. Coach is running late, Caleb said. Saw that. Tom squinted down the road. You nervous? Should I be? Hell, I would be. Woman traveling all that way based on letters? That's a leap of faith on both sides. Caleb didn't answer. Faith wasn't something he thought about much. You worked. You kept your word. You did right by people when you could. That was religion enough. What if she takes one look at Cedar Ridge and gets right back on that coach? Tom asked, not unkindly. Then I'll have a new quilt and a fixed porch, Caleb said. Tom laughed. That's the spirit. Well, I hope she's everything you wrote about. Town could use more good women. As the sheriff walked away, Caleb felt the weight of the moment settle over him. What if she did turn around? What if the reality of him, weathered, rough-handed, nothing special, didn't match whatever picture she'd built in her mind? He pushed the thought away. Doubt was quicksand. You either moved forward or you sank. Then he heard it. The distant rumble of wheels and horses. The stagecoach appeared through the dust and heat shimmer, 6 horses pulling hard, the driver's whip cracking. It came in fast, faster than usual, and when it pulled up to the platform, the horses were lathered and blowing hard. Something was wrong. The driver, old Pete Crenshaw, climbed down stiffly. His face was tight, eyes scanning the platform with an edge Caleb recognized. The look of a man who'd seen trouble. Evening, Pete, Caleb said carefully. Morgan? Pete's voice was rough. He moved to the coach door but paused. You expecting someone? I am. From Philadelphia? Caleb's pulse quickened. That's right. Margaret Hale. Pete's jaw worked. She ain't on this coach. The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb's hands tightened on his hat brim. What do you mean she's not, but someone else is? Pete pulled the door open. And she asked for you by name. The woman who stepped down from the stagecoach wasn't Margaret Hale. She was younger, maybe 25 to Margaret's 30, taller, lean in a way that suggested hard travel rather than hunger. She wore a long dark coat despite the heat, riding trousers instead of a dress, and boots that had seen serious miles. Her hair was pulled back tight, auburn streaked with copper, and her face was striking, not beautiful in the delicate sense, but strong-featured and impossible to look away from. But what caught Caleb's attention, what made every instinct in his body go quiet and alert, was the revolver holstered at her hip. She looked directly at him. Caleb Morgan? Her voice was clear, educated, with an accent he couldn't quite place. Eastern, but not city soft. There was steel underneath. I am, he said slowly. She glanced at Pete, then at the handful of townspeople who'd gathered to meet the coach. Is there somewhere we can talk, privately? Depends on what we're talking about. Margaret Hale. The name cut through his caution. What about her? She sent me. The woman reached into her coat. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his belt before he stopped himself and pulled out an envelope. She asked me to give you this, and to explain why she couldn't come. Caleb took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was Margaret's. He'd know it anywhere, but nothing about this made sense. Who are you? Evelyn Pierce. She said it like he might recognize the name. When he didn't react, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe. I'm a friend of Margaret's. More or less. More or less. It's complicated. Her eyes swept the platform again, lingering on the shadows between buildings. Can we go somewhere less exposed, please? The please softened something in Caleb, though his guard stayed up. He gestured toward the hotel across the street. There's a sitting room inside, quiet this time of evening. Not the hotel, Evelyn said quickly. Somewhere with multiple exits and a clear view of the street. Caleb studied her, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand stayed near, but not on, her weapon, the careful scan of her surroundings. This woman was running from something. "The saloon," he said. "Back table. 2 doors, windows on 3 sides. That'll work." As they crossed the street, Caleb was aware of eyes watching. Cedar Ridge was small enough that strangers drew attention, especially armed strangers who arrived asking for specific people. He caught Sheriff Brennan's gaze from down the boardwalk. Tom's expression asked a clear question. Caleb gave a small shake of his head. "Not yet." "I don't know yet." Inside the saloon, the evening crowd was just beginning to gather. A few ranch hands, a couple of card games, the bartender wiping glasses with mechanical precision. Caleb led Evelyn to the back corner table she'd want, the one with sight lines to both doors and the windows facing the street. They sat. Caleb placed the unopened letter on the table between them. "Talk," he said. Evelyn pulled off her gloves slowly, buying time or gathering thoughts. He couldn't tell which. Her hands were scarred, small nicks and old burns, the marks of someone who'd worked with tools, horses, maybe weapons, not the hands of a seamstress's friend. "Margaret is ill," she began. "Nothing deadly, but enough that traveling would be dangerous. She collapsed 2 weeks ago. Fever. The doctors say she needs rest and care." Caleb's chest tightened. Will she recover?" "They think so, but it'll be months, not weeks." He looked down at the letter, imagining what it said. Apologies. Explanations. Maybe hope for later. Maybe goodbye. "You came all this way to tell me that?" he asked. "Could have sent a telegram." "I came because Margaret has a problem." Evelyn's voice dropped. "And because of your letters, she thought you might be the kind of man who'd understand that some problems can't be solved with telegrams." "What kind of problem?" Evelyn leaned forward. "Have you heard of Blackstone Valley? Mining territory, north of here, maybe 200 miles. Silver strikes last year. Margaret inherited land there, 100 acres from an uncle she barely knew. She didn't think much of it until she started getting offers." "Offers?" "To buy. First reasonable, then generous, then desperate. Men showing up at her door, letters from lawyers, pressure from people with money and influence." Evelyn's jaw set. "Margaret's not stupid. She had the land surveyed quietly. There's silver there, unregistered, significant." Caleb began to see the shape of it. "And these men think she's going to hide the claim. They think she's going to marry a rancher out west and register it under his name, away from Philadelphia courts and Eastern investors." Evelyn's eyes locked on his. "They intercepted one of her letters to you. Not all of it, but enough to know she was planning to come here. To Cedar Ridge. To you." The pieces fell into place with cold clarity. "They think I'm part of it," Caleb said. "They think you're her way of making the claim disappear into Western jurisdiction, where they can't easily reach it, and they're not willing to let that happen." Caleb sat back. His simple life, his quiet ranch, his honest work, suddenly felt very far away. What do they want? Leverage, proof, maybe just to scare her into selling. Evelyn's voice was matter of fact, but her eyes held something harder. "Margaret can't travel, can't defend herself right now, so they'll come here, to you, to see what you know." "I don't know anything." "They don't believe in coincidence, only opportunity." She paused. "That's why I came." "To warn me?" "To draw them away from her." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb studied this woman, this Evelyn Pierce who carried herself like a gunfighter and talked about danger like other people discussed weather. "Who are you really?" he asked quietly. "Someone who makes problems go away." Evelyn's smile was thin. "Usually by making myself the bigger problem. I owed Margaret a favor. She called it in. By making yourself a target. I've been a target before. I know how to handle it." She gestured to the letter. "Read what she wrote. I'll answer your questions after." Caleb broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Margaret's handwriting was shaky, less controlled than usual, but still her. "Dear Caleb, I'm sorry. I know those words don't cover the disappointment I'm causing, but they're the truest I have. I wanted to come. I wanted to see the ranch you described, the sky you wrote about, the life we might have built together. I'm ill. Not dying, the doctors assure me, but not well enough to make the journey. By the time you read this, you'll have met Evelyn. I've asked her to explain about the land, the men, the trouble that's found me even though I never went looking for it. You don't owe me anything. Our agreement was for me to come, and I haven't kept that promise. If you want to walk away, I understand, but if you're the man your letters suggested, someone who values honesty and stands firm when pushed, then I'm asking for your help. Not to fight, not to risk yourself, just to be present. To let people know I have connections in Cedar Ridge, that I'm not alone and vulnerable. Sometimes the appearance of alliance is enough to make powerful men reconsider their tactics. Evelyn will protect herself. She's better at it than anyone I know. But having someone trustworthy in her corner would mean everything. I wish things were different. I wish I was arriving on that Thursday coach wearing something pretty, nervous but hopeful, ready to see if our words translated into something real. Maybe someday we'll have that chance. Maybe this illness and this trouble will pass, and I'll make that journey after all. Until then, I'm asking you to trust a stranger because I trust her, and because I've come to trust you. Yours in hope, Margaret. Caleb read it twice. The disappointment was real. He'd let himself imagine something different, something easier. But underneath that was something else. Margaret hadn't just written asking for help. She'd trusted him with a choice. He looked up at Evelyn. These men, how dangerous are they? Dangerous enough to kill if they think it serves their interests. Smart enough to make it look like accident or self-defense. She didn't sugarcoat it. But they prefer intimidation, cheaper, cleaner, less legal risk. How many? Don't know for certain, at least 4 based on what Margaret's seen. Could be more. They're backed by money, investors who want that silver claim and don't care much about the law when it's inconvenient. And you want to make them think you're important enough to come after instead of Margaret. I want to make them think chasing this lead is more trouble than it's worth. Evelyn's voice was steady. I show up. I'm visible. I make it clear Margaret sent someone else to handle her affairs. They investigate. They find nothing connecting you to the claim, and eventually they give up and go back to making offers directly to Margaret when she's well enough to negotiate from strength. And if they don't give up, then I handle it. The casual way she said it sent a chill through Caleb. This wasn't bravado. This was a woman stating a simple fact about her capabilities. You've done this before, he said. Yes. For Margaret? A pause. For people who needed it. Caleb folded the letter and set it aside. Outside, the sun was nearly down, painting the street in shades of amber and shadow. He thought about his ranch waiting in the dark, his horses, his plans, the life he'd built with his own hands. He thought about Margaret, sick and scared in Philadelphia, trusting a stranger to protect what she'd inherited. He thought about this woman across from him, armed and alert, offering to put herself between danger and someone who couldn't fight back. You could stay at the hotel, he said finally. Make yourself visible like you want. I'll vouch for you if anyone asks questions. That's not enough. What do you mean? These men are careful, professional. They'll watch you, investigate your connections, try to figure out what Margaret might have told you. Evelyn leaned forward. If I'm just someone passing through, I'm not worth their attention. But if I'm staying at your ranch, working with you, visible as your associate, then I'm someone they have to account for. Caleb saw where this was going. You want to stay at my place. I want to make it look like Margaret sent me to handle business with you directly, to make them think there's something worth investigating. She held his gaze. I'll earn my keep. I can work, fix things. I know horses, and I can shoot straight. You won't be providing charity. That's not what I'm worried about. What are you worried about? He gestured at her gun. That you're bringing a fight to my doorstep. The fight's already coming. Margaret's letters put you in the frame whether you knew it or not. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. I'm offering to make it end faster and cleaner than if you wait for them to find you on their own terms. It was solid logic. Caleb hated that it was solid logic. How long? He asked. Week, maybe 2, long enough for them to investigate, find nothing, and move on. And if they don't move on? Then we make them regret not moving on. Caleb sat with that. He was a rancher, not a fighter. He could shoot. Every man out here could. But he'd never drawn on another human being, never had to. His life had been built on avoiding exactly this kind of trouble, but Margaret had trusted him. And something about this woman, this Evelyn Pierce with her scars and certainty, made him believe she knew what she was doing. One condition, he said. Name it. No killing unless there's no other choice. These men come at us. We defend ourselves. But I won't have murder on my land. Evelyn's expression flickered. For a moment he thought she might argue. Then she nodded. Fair enough. I prefer not to kill anyway. Too much paperwork. The dry humor caught him off guard. A small smile tugged at his mouth despite everything. When do we leave? Tonight. The later the better. I want to arrive in the dark, get settled before anyone knows where I am. My wagon's at the livery. I have a horse. Of course she did. They stood. Caleb left money on the table for the drinks they hadn't ordered but would explain their presence. As they moved toward the door, Evelyn's hand went to her gun. Not drawing, just checking its presence. A habit so ingrained she probably didn't notice. Outside, the street was darker now. Lamps flickered to life in windows. The evening stage sat empty, Pete already gone to his boarding house. A few people still moved about, but Cedar Ridge was settling into its quiet night rhythm. Sheriff Brennan stepped out of the shadows. Morgan, miss! He tipped his hat to Evelyn, his eyes taking in every detail. Her gun, her stance, the way she positioned herself with the wall at her back. Everything all right? Fine, Tom, Caleb said. Miss Pierce here is an associate of Miss Hale. She's brought word that Margaret's been delayed by illness. Sorry to hear that. Tom's gaze didn't leave Evelyn. Serious? Doctors say she'll recover, Evelyn said smoothly. But the journey's postponed. I'm here to handle some business on her behalf. What kind of business? The boring kind. Papers, correspondence, making sure her interests are represented. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Nothing that concerns the law, Sheriff. Tom didn't smile back. You carrying that gun legal? I am. Planning to use it? Only if someone gives me reason to. The tension stretched taut. Caleb stepped in. Miss Pierce is staying at my ranch for a few days while we sort through Margaret's affairs. I'd appreciate it if you'd let folks know she's here on legitimate business. Tom looked between them. Caleb could see him weighing possibilities, trying to decide if this was trouble worth pursuing or preventing. How long are you planning to stay? Tom asked Evelyn. A week, perhaps 2. And then? Back east, back to Margaret. Tom nodded slowly. All right. But if there's any trouble, any at all, I want to know about it. We're a quiet town, and we like it that way. Understood, Sheriff, Evelyn said. They parted. Caleb and Evelyn walked toward the livery in silence. Halfway there, Evelyn spoke quietly. He's good. Careful. He keeps the peace. Will he be a problem? Only if we give him reason to be. At the livery, Caleb hitched his wagon while Evelyn retrieved her horse, a strong-looking bay gelding with intelligent eyes and trail-hardened hooves. She loaded her saddlebags and rifle with efficient movements, double-checking everything out of habit. You travel light, Caleb observed. Easier to move fast when you need to. You do that often? Move fast? Evelyn mounted smoothly. In the lamplight, her face was shadowed, unreadable. Often enough to be good at it. They left Cedar Ridge with the moon rising behind them. The road to Caleb's ranch wound through low hills and scattered timber, following a creek that ran year-round. It was 10 miles, easy travel in daylight, trickier in the dark, but manageable. Caleb let the horses find their rhythm. Beside him, Evelyn rode with the relaxed alertness of someone used to night travel. She scanned the darkness regularly, but didn't seem nervous. Just aware. Can I ask you something? Caleb said after a while. You can ask. Why do you do this? Help people? Put yourself in danger for strangers. Evelyn was quiet long enough that Caleb thought she might not answer. Then, because I'm good at it, and because most people aren't. That's not much of a reason. It's the only reason I've got. She glanced at him. Why'd you agree to help Margaret? You could have read that letter, decided it was too much trouble, and walked away. No one would have blamed you. Caleb considered. She asked, and she needed it. See? Same reason, just different skills. They rode on. The night was clear, stars thick overhead. Somewhere an owl called. The creek gurgled over stones. It was peaceful in the way only true wilderness could be, empty of human noise, full of everything else. "Your ranch," Evelyn said. "Tell me about it." "Why?" "Because if men come looking, I need to know the ground, approaches, cover, sight lines." "Right, because that's what this was. Not a social visit, a strategic position." 300 acres, Caleb said. "Cabin sits on a rise overlooking the creek, barn and corral below, pastures to the north and west, timber to the east. One main road in, but there's game trails through the woods, if you know them." "Neighbors?" "Closest is the Hendersons, 5 miles south. We're fairly isolated." "Good. Is it?" "Means if trouble comes, it comes to us, not to innocent people." Caleb hadn't thought of it that way. The isolation he'd valued for its peace suddenly felt like strategic vulnerability. "You really think they'll come?" he asked. "I think they'll investigate. Maybe watch from a distance. Maybe send someone to talk, feel us out." Evelyn's voice was calm. "But yes, eventually they'll come. And then?" "Then we show them there's nothing here worth their time." "How?" "By being exactly what we appear to be. A rancher and a woman handling a friend's business. Boring, legitimate, nothing worth the risk of pushing further." It sounded reasonable. Caleb wanted to believe it would be that simple. The ranch appeared as they crested the final rise. Moonlight silvered the cabin roof and caught the creek's surface below. Caleb felt the familiar tightness in his chest ease slightly, the feeling of coming home to something that was his. Evelyn studied it silently. "You built this?" "Most of it. It's good work." The compliment was simple but felt earned. They rode down to the barn. Caleb unhitched the wagon while Evelyn saw to her horse, moving through the tasks with practiced efficiency. She found the grain, the water, the tack hooks, requiring no instruction. "You've worked ranches before," Caleb observed. "Among other things." He waited for elaboration. None came. Inside the cabin, Caleb lit lamps. The space was simple. Main room with fireplace and kitchen area, bedroom in the back, ladder to a small loft. Clean but sparse, functional. Evelyn set her saddlebags down. "You live alone." "For now." "Margaret really would have come here." "She said so." "Must have been one hell of a letter writer." Caleb almost smiled. "We understood each other. Or I thought we did." Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the dark yard. "For what it's worth, she spoke highly of you. Said you seemed steady, honest, the kind of man who'd do the right thing even when it cost him." "She doesn't know me well enough to say that." "Maybe. Or maybe she's a good judge of character." Evelyn turned. "You took me in based on a letter from a woman you've never met. That says something." Caleb wasn't sure what it said. That he was helpful? Stupid? Lonely enough to trust strangers? "Loft's yours," he said, changing the subject. "Bedding's clean. Not fancy, but warm enough. It's fine. I've slept in worse." He believed her. They settled in with minimal conversation. Caleb banked the fire while Evelyn checked the windows and doors. Not obviously, but he noticed. She was cataloging exits, angles, vulnerabilities, preparing. "Get some rest," she said eventually. "Tomorrow I'll look over the property, figure out the best defensive positions." Defensive positions. Hope for peace, prepare for war. She headed for the latter. "It's kept me breathing this long." Caleb lay in his bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin settling. Above, Evelyn moved carefully, making minimal noise. He wondered what her story was. What brought a woman to carry a gun like a professional, to speak of violence like a craftsman discussing tools? He wondered if Margaret knew the full truth of who she'd sent. He wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Outside, the creek murmured its endless song. The horses settled in the barn. The night held its breath. And somewhere out there, men with money and cold calculation were making plans of their own. Caleb closed his eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. Morning came cold and gray, the kind of dawn that promised rain by afternoon. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and found Evelyn already outside, walking the perimeter of his property with the methodical attention of someone mapping a battlefield. He poured himself a cup and watched her from the porch. She moved differently in daylight, less guarded, but no less aware. Every few steps she'd pause, measuring angles, checking sight lines from the cabin to the tree line, from the barn to the road. Her hand rested naturally near her revolver, not threatening, just ready. When she circled back, her expression was thoughtful. "You've got good elevation here," she said, climbing the porch steps. "Anyone approaching from the main road is visible for half a mile. That's an advantage." "Never thought of it that way." "Most people don't." She accepted the coffee he offered. "But those trees to the east are close enough for cover. Someone smart could use them to get within 100 yards without being seen." Caleb looked at the stand of pines he'd always considered picturesque. "You think they'd try that? If they want to watch without being noticed?" "Yes." Evelyn sipped the coffee, nodded approval. "We should clear some of that brush, make it harder to hide." "That's a day's work at least." "Then we'd better start." They worked through the morning in companionable silence, Caleb with an axe, Evelyn with a saw. She handled the tools with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. No wasted motion, no complaints. The physical labor seemed to settle something in her, like she needed the work to think clearly. By noon, they'd cleared a 30-foot buffer. Caleb's shoulders burned and sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool air. Evelyn barely looked winded. "You do this kind of work often?" he asked, driving his axe into a stump. "Field preparation? Sometimes." She wiped her blade clean. "Mostly I try to choose ground that's already favorable." "But you don't always get to choose." "No, sometimes the ground chooses you." They ate lunch on the porch, bread, cheese, and smoked meat from Caleb's stores. The clouds had thickened overhead, turning the sky the color of old iron. Rain was definitely coming. "Tell me about these men," Caleb said. "The ones you think are coming." Evelyn set down her food. "What do you want to know?" "Who they work for, what they're capable of." "They're employed by a consortium. 3, maybe 4 investors who got wind of the silver on Margaret's land before it was publicly registered. Men with enough money to buy influence, but not enough patience to wait for legal channels." She spoke factually, without emotion. "They've used intimidation before. Property damage, threats. Once, maybe twice, violence that couldn't be directly traced back to them." "You know this for certain?" "I know people who've dealt with them. And I know their pattern." Evelyn's eyes were steady. "They start soft. Offers, pressure. If that doesn't work, they escalate. They're smart enough to stay within legal gray areas until they're sure it's necessary to step outside them." "And you think we're at which stage?" "The investigation stage. They know Margaret was planning to come here. They know your name. They'll want to verify whether you're actually involved in hiding the claim or just an innocent bystander." "What happens when they figure out I'm innocent?" "Depends." Evelyn picked up her food again. "If they're satisfied you're not a threat, they'll leave you alone and focus back on Margaret. If they think you know something useful, they'll try to leverage you for information. If they're desperate or stupid, they might try to use you as pressure against her." "None of those options sound good." "They're not. But the first one gets us out of this clean." She met his eyes. "That's what we're aiming for." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Caleb watched the clouds build, thinking about what normal used to mean. A week ago, his biggest concern was a fence that needed mending. Now he was discussing leverage and intimidation tactics with an armed stranger. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You can ask." "Why does Margaret trust you with this? You said you owed her a favor, but this seems like more than evening a debt." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Rain began to patter on the roof, soft at first, then stronger. 3 years ago I was in trouble," she said finally. "Bad trouble. The kind that doesn't end well without help. Margaret gave me a place to hide when I had nowhere else to go. Didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just opened her door and told me I could stay until it was safe to leave." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind I'm trying not to repeat." Evelyn's voice was firm, not angry, but clearly done with that line of questioning. "She helped me when she didn't have to. Now she needs help. That's all that matters." Caleb nodded slowly. Everyone had history they didn't want to revisit. He could respect that. The rain intensified, turning the yard to mud. They moved inside as water drummed against the windows. Caleb built up the fire while Evelyn checked her weapons with the careful attention of a craftsman maintaining tools. She field-stripped her revolver, cleaned each component, reassembled it with practiced hands. You handle that like you were born with it, Caleb observed. Might as well have been. She checked the cylinder, satisfied. My father was a gunsmith. I grew up around weapons. By the time I was 12, I could strip and clean anything he made. That's young. He believed in useful skills. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, crossed her face. Said if you're going to live in a world with guns, you'd better understand them completely or not at all. Smart man. He was. She holstered the weapon. Dead now, 10 years. I'm sorry. Don't be. He lived the life he wanted. That's more than most people get. The afternoon wore on with the steady sound of rain. Caleb worked on tack that needed repair while Evelyn studied a small notebook she'd pulled from her saddlebag. Occasionally she'd write something down, her handwriting small and precise. What's that? Caleb asked. Notes. People I might need to contact, information about the investors and their known associates. She glanced up. Insurance, in case things go wrong. You always prepare for the worst? I prepare for what's likely. The worst just happens to be likely enough to worry about. Caleb thought about that philosophy, living constantly ready for violence, for betrayal, for things to fall apart. It sounded exhausting. Must be hard, he said, never really settling down. It has its moments, Evelyn closed the notebook. But settling down means putting down roots. And roots make you vulnerable. They also make you strong, give you something worth protecting. Maybe. She looked around the cabin. This what you wanted? Building something permanent? It's what I needed. Caleb set down the bridle he was working on. I spent years drifting. Different ranches, different towns. Good work, but always temporary. Started feeling like I was just passing through my own life. So you stopped passing through. Bought land that was mine. Built walls that would last. Finally felt like I was somewhere instead of just between places. He met her eyes. Don't you ever want that? Evelyn considered the question seriously. I used to, long time ago, but wanting something and being able to have it are different things. What's stopping you? The same thing that makes me good at what I do. Her voice was quiet. You can't protect people if you're worried about protecting yourself. Can't move fast if you're anchored down. Can't make hard choices if you've got too much to lose. Sounds lonely. It is. She said it simply, without self-pity. But it's honest work, and someone has to do it. The rain had settled into a steady pour by evening. Caleb made dinner, venison stew with vegetables from his root cellar, thick bread he'd baked 2 days prior. They ate at the small table, the firelight casting long shadows across the walls. This is good, Evelyn said. You cook like this often? Had to learn. Can't survive on jerky and beans forever. Some men try. She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less guarded. I've known plenty who'd rather starve than boil water. Seems foolish. Most things men do seem foolish if you look close enough, Caleb laughed despite himself. Fair point. They were cleaning up when they heard the horses. Evelyn's hand went to her gun before the sound fully registered in Caleb's mind. She moved to the window, staying to the side, peering out through the rain-streaked glass. 2 riders, she said quietly. Coming up the main road. Caleb's pulse kicked up. Could be neighbors. In this weather, at night? She shook her head. Get your rifle. Stay by the door. Don't show yourself unless I signal. What are you going to do? Talk to them. She checked her revolver. See what they want. Evelyn, trust me. She stepped out onto the porch before he could argue, closing the door behind her. Caleb grabbed his Winchester from above the mantel, checked the load, and positioned himself where he could see through the window without being easily visible. The riders came slowly, their shapes dark against the rain. They stopped 30 feet from the porch, keeping their distance. Smart, non-threatening, but cautious. Evening, one of them called. His voice was educated, smooth. We're looking for Caleb Morgan. State your business, Evelyn said. Her voice carried clearly despite the rain. We have questions about a mutual acquaintance, Margaret Hale. She's not here. We know. We're looking for Mr. Morgan. He's not receiving visitors. The rider shifted in his saddle. Even through the rain and darkness, Caleb could see he was well dressed. City clothes, expensive horse. This wasn't some ranch hand or drifter. "We just want to talk," the man said. "No trouble, just conversation. Then come back in daylight, when conversation doesn't require riding through a storm. We'd prefer to handle this quietly, tonight." "I'm sure you would." Evelyn's hand rested on her gun, casual but clear. "But Mr. Morgan's asleep, and I don't wake him for strangers who won't give their names." A pause. The second rider leaned toward the first, whispered something Caleb couldn't hear. "My name is Richard Vance," the first man said. "I represent certain business interests back east, interests that may overlap with Miss Hale's recent inheritance." Funny how business interests always find their way to people's property in the middle of the night. Even from inside, Caleb heard the edge in Vance's voice when he replied. "We're trying to be civilized about this, Miss Pierce. Evelyn Pierce. Miss Pierce. We simply want to verify certain information, ensure there are no misunderstandings." "What kind of misunderstandings?" "The kind that happen when valuable assets change hands without proper documentation." Vance's horse sidled, uneasy in the rain. "We have reason to believe Miss Hale may be attempting to obscure ownership of certain mineral rights through proxy agreements." "You think she's hiding a claim through Mr. Morgan?" "We think it's a possibility worth investigating." "Well, investigate away." Evelyn's voice was steady. "But you won't find anything. Mr. Morgan is a rancher. He has no interest in mining claims, mineral rights, or your business ventures. Miss Hale asked him to marry her because she wanted a different life, not because she wanted to hide assets." "Then he won't mind answering a few questions." "He'll answer them when he's ready, during daylight, in town, with the sheriff present if you'd like." Evelyn took a step forward. "But right now you're on private property, uninvited, in the dark. That's trespassing, and I don't care how smooth you talk. You've got 30 seconds to turn around before I decide you're a threat." The second rider's hand moved toward his coat. Evelyn's revolver cleared leather so fast Caleb barely saw the motion. She didn't aim directly at them, but the weapon was up, ready. "Don't," she said quietly. The rider froze. Vance raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "We're not here for violence, Miss Pierce." "Good. Then leaving should be easy." The tension stretched like a wire ready to snap. Rain hammered down. The horses shifted nervously. Finally, Vance nodded. "We'll return tomorrow, daylight, civilized conversation." "Looking forward to it." They turned their horses and rode back into the darkness. Evelyn stood motionless until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then another full minute after that. Only then did she holster her weapon and come back inside. Caleb lowered his rifle. "That was them." "That was them." Evelyn's face was tight. "And they're more nervous than I expected." "What do you mean?" "Coming at night in bad weather? That's not investigation. That's desperation." She paced to the fire, thinking. "They're under pressure. Either their investors are pushing hard, or they've got information that's making them anxious." "Anxious enough to be dangerous?" "Maybe. Or anxious enough to make mistakes." Evelyn turned. "Either way, tomorrow's conversation is going to matter. How we handle it could determine whether this ends quietly or escalates." Caleb set down his rifle, but his hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. "What do we tell them?" "The truth. That you and Margaret exchanged letters about marriage, not business. That you know nothing about her inheritance or any silver claims. That you're just a rancher who's disappointed his bride couldn't make the journey." "Simple." "Simple is believable." Evelyn met his eyes. "Can you do that? Stay calm, answer honestly, not let them provoke you?" "I can do it." "Good. Because they'll try to provoke you. They'll imply you're lying, suggest you're involved in fraud, maybe even threaten legal action. They want you nervous enough to reveal something useful." "I don't have anything to reveal." "I know, but they don't know that yet." She rubbed her face, suddenly looking tired. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But neither of them slept well. Caleb lay in his bed listening to Evelyn move quietly in the loft, checking the windows periodically. He understood why. Once violence became possible, vigilance became necessary. The rain continued through the night, turning the world soft and gray. Dawn broke reluctantly, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. Caleb made coffee and found Evelyn already dressed, her hair tied back, her gun cleaned and ready. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how men like Vance operate, what angles they might use." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "About what happens if talking doesn't work." "What does happen?" "Then we adapt." She said it like it was simple, but Caleb heard the weight underneath. One step at a time. They rode into town mid-morning, Caleb in his wagon, Evelyn on her horse. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained threatening. Cedar Ridge looked different to Caleb now, less like home, more like a stage where something dangerous was about to play out. Sheriff Brennan was waiting at his office, clearly expecting them. Caleb had sent word the night before, asking him to be present for the meeting. Tom had agreed immediately. Anything unusual got his attention, and armed strangers asking questions about townspeople definitely qualified. "Morning," Tom said, his eyes moving between them. "Want to tell me what this is about?" Caleb explained while Evelyn stood quietly by the window, watching the street. He kept it simple. Margaret's inheritance, the investor's interest, last night's visit. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression growing steadily more concerned. "These men threaten you?" he asked when Caleb finished. "Not directly," Evelyn said, "but they made their interest clear." "Interest in what exactly?" "In whether Mr. Morgan is helping Miss Hale hide a valuable mining claim from its rightful ownership." "And is he?" "No." Evelyn turned from the window. "He's exactly what he appears to be, a rancher who wrote letters to a woman looking for a different life. The timing is coincidental, but these investors don't believe in coincidence." Tom leaned back in his chair. "So they think there's something here worth investigating." "They think there might be. My job is to convince them there isn't." "And if you can't convince them?" "Then this becomes your problem, Sheriff, because if they push harder, laws are going to get broken. And I'd rather that didn't happen." Tom studied her. "You're not just a friend of Margaret's, are you?" "No." "What are you?" "Someone who solves problems." Evelyn's voice was steady. "Preferably before they become crimes." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." The tension between them was palpable. Caleb stepped in. "Tom, I'm asking you as a friend, be present when they come. Make sure this stays civil. I don't want trouble, but I won't be bullied either." Tom looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. When are they supposed to arrive?" "Said they'd come today. Didn't specify when." "Then we wait." They didn't have to wait long. Richard Vance appeared an hour later with 3 men instead of 1. They came in a hired carriage, dressed like businessmen, carrying leather portfolios instead of obvious weapons. But Caleb noticed the way they moved, the alertness in their eyes. These weren't soft city men. They had experience with trouble. Sheriff Brennan met them on the street, his badge visible, his rifle cradled casually in his arms. "Gentlemen, I understand you have business with Mr. Morgan." Vance stepped forward. In daylight, he was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 35, handsome in a polished way, with cold, intelligent eyes. "We do. We appreciate the sheriff's presence, shows this is being handled properly." "That's the idea." Tom gestured toward his office. "Let's talk inside." They gathered in the sheriff's office, Tom behind his desk, Caleb and Evelyn standing by the wall, Vance and his associates arranged opposite. The other men didn't introduce themselves. They just stood there, watching everything, missing nothing. Vance opened his portfolio and pulled out several documents. "Mr. Morgan, I'll be direct. We represent a group of investors interested in properties near Blackstone Valley. We've learned that Margaret Hale, your intended bride, recently inherited land in that region, land that may contain significant mineral deposits." "I know about the inheritance," Caleb said. "Margaret mentioned it in one of her letters." "Did she mention the value?" "She said men were making offers. Seemed like good land." "Did she ask you to help her secure the claim, to register it under your name to avoid certain legal complications?" "No." Vance's expression didn't change. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. Our arrangement was about marriage, not business. She wanted to leave the city. I was looking for a partner, that's all. Convenient timing, though, her inheritance and your sudden engagement. We'd been writing for months before she knew about any inheritance. Caleb kept his voice level. Check the postmarks if you don't believe me. One of Vance's associates whispered something. Vance nodded slightly. We'd like to see those letters. No, Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. Those letters are private correspondence, she continued. You have no legal right to them, and Mr. Morgan has no obligation to share personal documents with investors who have no claim to his property or affairs. Vance's smile was thin. Miss Pierce, the woman who draws guns on visitors in the night. The woman who protects her friend's interests from men who trespass and make accusations without evidence. We're not accusing anyone. We're investigating. Same thing when you phrase it like that. Evelyn crossed her arms. You think Miss Hale is hiding assets. You think Mr. Morgan is helping her, but you have no proof because there's nothing to prove. So you're here hoping intimidation will produce something you can use. That's a harsh interpretation. Is there a softer one? Vance turned back to Caleb. Mr. Morgan, surely you understand our position. We have legitimate business interests in that region. We need to ensure that claims are properly registered and honestly obtained. If Miss Hale is circumventing proper channels, she's not, Caleb interrupted. And even if she were, that's between her and your investors. I'm not involved. I don't know anything about mining claims or how any of that legal work happens. I'm a rancher. That's all I am. A rancher who was about to marry a woman with valuable property. A rancher who was about to marry a woman he'd been writing to for months. The property is her concern, not mine. Vance pulled out another document. We have information suggesting otherwise, communications that indicate hearsay, Evelyn cut in. Nothing admissible, nothing actionable, just speculation you're dressing up as evidence. Vance's jaw tightened. For the first time, his polish cracked slightly. Miss Pierce, I'm trying to handle this professionally, but if you continue to obstruct, I'm not obstructing. I'm preventing you from bullying someone who's done nothing wrong. Evelyn's voice was cold. You want to investigate Margaret Hale's claim? Go to Blackstone Valley. File your challenges through proper legal channels. But leave Mr. Morgan alone. He doesn't have what you're looking for. How can you be so certain? Because I've seen what you're looking for, and it's not here. The room went very quiet. Vance studied Evelyn with new intensity. You've seen the claim? I've seen the paperwork, the surveys, the legal registrations. She met his eyes. Everything you're worried about is already filed properly with the territorial office. Margaret's uncle did it before he died. The claim is legitimate, documented, and completely outside anything Mr. Morgan knows about or has access to. That's not possible. We checked the records. You checked the wrong records, or someone misled you about which records to check. Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. Either way, you're chasing shadows. The claim exists. It's legal. And it has nothing to do with Cedar Ridge or this man. Caleb watched Vance process this information, saw the calculation behind his eyes, weighing whether Evelyn was telling the truth, whether his information was wrong, whether he'd been sent on a fool's errand. If what you're saying is true, Vance said slowly, then someone has been less than honest with my employers. That's often how these things work. Someone smells money, spreads rumors, and suddenly everyone's investigating ghosts. Evelyn shrugged. Check the territorial records in Blackstone Valley. You'll find everything properly filed under Margaret Hale's name. No proxies, no hidden transfers, just inheritance law working exactly as it should. Vance looked at his associates. Silent communication passed between them. Finally, he gathered his documents. We'll verify what you've said, he told Evelyn. If the records support your claims, this matter is concluded. But if we find you've misled us, you won't. For your sake, I hope not. Vance looked at Caleb. Mr. Morgan, I apologize for any inconvenience. We're simply protecting our interests. Understood, Caleb said, though he didn't understand at all. But those interests don't include me. Vance nodded and left with his men. Through the window, Caleb watched them climb into their carriage and drive away. Sheriff Brennan waited until they were out of sight before speaking. Miss Pierce, those records you mentioned, do they actually exist? Evelyn smiled faintly. They do now. Meaning? Meaning I had them filed yesterday. Sent a telegram to someone I trust in Blackstone Valley. The claim is registered exactly as I described. Legal, proper, and completely separated from anything here. She looked at Tom. Sometimes the best way to end an investigation is to give them exactly what they're looking for, just not where they expected to find it. Caleb stared at her. You planned this. I prepared for it, there's a difference. Evelyn moved toward the door. Vance will verify the records. He'll find everything legitimate. And unless his employers are stupider than I think, they'll realize pursuing this further is pointless. The claim is registered. They can make offers directly to Margaret when she's well enough to negotiate. But the conspiracy they imagine doesn't exist. And if they don't believe it, then they come back, and we deal with that if it happens. She glanced at Tom. Thank you, Sheriff, for keeping this official. Just doing my job. Tom stood. But, Miss Pierce, if there's more trouble coming, I want to know about it before it arrives. Fair enough. They left the office and walked through Cedar Ridge's quiet streets. The threatened rain still hadn't come, leaving everything tense and waiting. Caleb felt wound tight, like his nerves were strings tuned too sharp. You think that's it? He asked. They'll just leave? Probably. Evelyn's eyes scanned the buildings, the alleys, the places where watchers might hide. But we stay careful anyway, just in case. They reached Caleb's wagon. He stood there, hands on the rough wood, trying to process everything that had happened. A week ago, he'd been waiting for a bride. Now he was caught in schemes involving silver claims and Eastern investors, standing beside a woman who solved problems with filed paperwork and loaded guns. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For handling that. I would have fumbled through it. You would have been fine. Honest men usually are. Evelyn mounted her horse. But you're welcome. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them watching the horizon, waiting for whatever came next. The peace lasted 3 days. 3 days of normal ranch work, mending fence, rotating cattle to fresh pasture, breaking ice on the water troughs as autumn turned sharp and cold. Evelyn worked alongside Caleb without complaint, handling horses with the easy competence of someone who'd spent years in the saddle. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural, like they'd been working together longer than a handful of days. But the peace was an illusion, and they both knew it. Caleb noticed the signs first. Small things that wouldn't mean much alone, but together formed a pattern. Hoof prints on the north trail where no neighbor had reason to ride. A broken branch near the tree line snapped at shoulder height like someone had pushed through recently. The horses skittish at dawn, ears pricked toward the eastern woods. Someone was watching. They haven't left, Evelyn said the third evening, standing at the window with a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. She'd been quieter than usual all day, her attention constantly drifting to the shadows beyond the cabin. Caleb looked up from the harness he was oiling. You sure? I'm sure. She set down the cup. Someone's been on your property, staying back, keeping hidden, but they're there. Could be drifters. Drifters move on. These people are watching, waiting. Her jaw tightened. They didn't believe what I told them about the records. Or they believe it, but want to push anyway. Why? If the claim's properly filed. Because men like Vance don't give up when money's involved. They just change tactics. Evelyn turned from the window. I thought showing them documented proof would be enough. I was wrong. Caleb set down his work. What do? We stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone. Keep weapons close. She moved to her saddlebag and pulled out a small pistol, a Derringer, compact and deadly at close range. You know how to use one of these? Never carried anything that small. It's simple. 2 shots. Point and pull. Last resort only. She held it out. Keep it in your coat pocket. If someone gets close enough that you need it, don't hesitate. The weight of the little gun felt wrong in Caleb's hand. Too light. Too easy. He'd hunted his whole life, killed deer and elk for meat. But the idea of pointing a weapon at another person made his stomach turn. I'm not a killer, Evelyn. Neither am I, not if I can help it. Her eyes were steady. But I'm a survivor, and right now survival means being ready for the worst while hoping for better. That night Caleb barely slept. He lay in his bed listening to every sound, The wind in the eaves, the horses shifting in the barn, the creek's constant murmur. Twice he thought he heard movement outside and reached for his rifle before realizing it was just branches scraping the cabin wall. Dawn came gray and cold, frost thick on the ground. Caleb was making coffee when Evelyn came down from the loft, moving faster than usual. "Someone's out there," she said quietly. "Southeast corner in those pines we didn't clear. Saw movement 5 minutes ago." Caleb's pulse jumped. "How many?" "At least one, maybe more." She was already checking her revolver. Could be they're just watching, or they could be getting ready to make a move. "We should get the sheriff. By the time we reach town and bring him back, they'll be gone." Evelyn moved to the window, staying to the side. "We need to know what they want, and we need them to know we're not easy targets." "So what do? We go out, together, armed. Make it clear we see them and we're not afraid." She looked at him. "You up for that?" Caleb thought about running, about saddling horses and riding to town, letting Tom Brennan handle this with badges and official authority. But he also thought about his ranch, his land, the life he'd built with his own hands. Running meant letting them take control of his home. "I'm up for it," he said. They went out the front door walking side by side. Caleb with his Winchester, Evelyn with her hand resting on her holstered revolver. The morning was sharp and still, their breath fogging in the cold air. Nothing moved in the tree line, but Caleb felt eyes on him like a physical weight. "We know you're there," Evelyn called out. Her voice carried clearly in the silence. "Show yourselves or move on. We're not interested in games." For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure stepped out from the pines, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat and a flat-brimmed hat. He held no visible weapon, but his stance suggested he knew where one was if he needed it. "Morning," the man said. His voice was rough, Western. "Name's Coleman. Here on behalf of Mr. Vance." "Mr. Vance got his answer in town," Evelyn said. "What more does he want?" "Just watching, making sure everything stays peaceful." "Watching private property without permission is called trespassing, Coleman, in case nobody taught you that." Coleman smiled without warmth. "I'm on the road, public access." "You're 50 yards into my tree line," Caleb said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "That's not the road." "Must have gotten turned around in the dark." Coleman took a step forward. Evelyn's hand moved to her gun. He stopped. "Easy now. Like I said, just watching." "Why?" "Because Mr. Vance likes to be thorough. Make sure people are who they say they are. That stories hold up under scrutiny." "Our story's been told," Evelyn said. "And it's true. There's nothing here for you or your employer." "Maybe. Maybe not." Coleman's eyes moved between them. "Funny thing, though, I asked around town about Miss Pierce here. Nobody knows you. Nobody's seen you before last week. You just appeared out of nowhere, claiming to represent Miss Hale. I don't owe the town my biography." "No, but it makes a man wonder." Coleman tilted his head. "What kind of woman shows up armed, ready for trouble, unless she's got something to protect?" "The kind who's dealt with men like you before." "And what kind is that?" "The kind who think intimidation is a business strategy." Coleman's smile widened. "You've got a sharp tongue, Miss Pierce. Hope your shooting's is good." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb's finger moved to the trigger guard of his Winchester, not aiming, but ready. He saw 2 more figures appear at the tree line, flanking Coleman's position. 3 men, all watching, all waiting. "Here's how this is going to work," Evelyn said, her voice cold and clear. "You're going to leave this property, all of you, and you're going to tell Mr. Vance that if he wants to investigate Margaret Hale's claim, he can do it legally, through proper channels. But if his men come on this land again without permission, we'll treat it as what it is, hostile intent." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a boundary. Cross it and see what happens." Coleman studied her for a long moment. Caleb could see him weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, he stepped back. "We'll be around," he said, "keeping an eye on things. For safety." "You do that. From the public road." Coleman and his men melted back into the trees. Caleb waited until the sound of horses faded completely before lowering his rifle. His hands were shaking. "That was closer than I wanted," he said. "It was a test." Evelyn's eyes were still locked on the tree line. "They wanted to see if we'd scare. We didn't. That matters." "What happens now?" "Now they escalate. Or they back off." She turned toward the cabin. "Either way, we're not safe here anymore. Not really." The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. They worked close to the cabin, never out of sight of each other, always aware of their surroundings. Caleb saw riders on the distant ridge twice, too far to identify, but close enough to know they were being watched. By evening, the tension had wound so tight that Caleb felt like he might snap. He was chopping wood behind the cabin when Evelyn came out, moving fast. "We've got a problem," she said. "What kind?" "Fire. Southwest pasture." Caleb dropped the axe and followed her around the cabin. Smoke rose in a thin black column maybe half a mile away. The wind was blowing wrong to spread it toward the ranch, but that wasn't the point. The point was clear. "They said it," he said. "They said it." Evelyn's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Not big enough to be real danger, just big enough to send a message." "What message?" "That they can hurt you whenever they want. That your property isn't safe. That cooperation would be easier than resistance." Caleb stared at the smoke, feeling something hard settle in his chest. He'd worked this land for 5 years, built it from nothing. Every fence post, every cleared acre, every structure represented his sweat and time, and now someone was burning it to make a point. "We're going to the sheriff," he said. "And tell him what? By the time we get there and bring him back, the fire will be out and any evidence gone. They're too smart to leave traces." "Then what do we do?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her jaw working. "We give them what they want?" "What?" "Not really, but we make them think we are." She turned to face him. "They want proof you're involved with the claim. They want something they can take back to their investors to justify their time and expense. So we give them something." "I don't understand." "I write a letter, make it look like it's from Margaret to you, discussing the claim. Something that could be interpreted as collusion if you squint right. Then we let them find it." Caleb shook his head. "That's lying. That's giving them ammunition. It's bait, and it'll be obviously fake if anyone actually investigates. But it gives them something to show their bosses, something that lets them save face and walk away. Or it confirms their suspicions and makes things worse. Not if we control how they find it, not if we make it clear that it's all they're going to get." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "Caleb, these men aren't going to stop on their own. They've invested too much time and money. They need something to justify it. We give them a crumb, let them think they've won something, and then they leave." "You can't know that." "No. But I know that doing nothing means this continues. More fires, more intimidation. Eventually someone gets hurt." Her eyes were fierce. "I'm trying to end this before it reaches that point." Caleb looked at the smoke still rising from his pasture, thought about Coleman's smile, about Richard Vance's cold calculation, about men who thought money gave them the right to burn a rancher's land to prove a point. "Write the letter," he said. Evelyn spent the evening crafting it carefully, copying Margaret's handwriting from the real letters Caleb still had. She made it vague enough to be useless in court but specific enough to seem valuable. References to the claim. Mentions of using Caleb's name for registration. Nothing concrete, but enough to suggest collusion if someone wanted to see it. "Where do we let them find it?" Caleb asked. "Barn. Make it look like you hid it badly, like you were trying to keep it safe but aren't very good at hiding things." She folded the letter. "They're already watching the property. One of them will search eventually. We make sure they find this and nothing else. And if they want more, then we tell them that's all there is. That Margaret changed her mind about the whole thing when she got sick. That the claim was filed properly and you were never actually involved." Evelyn met his eyes. The truth, basically. Just with this one lie to make them feel like their investigation wasn't completely worthless. It felt wrong, dishonest. But Caleb couldn't see another way forward that didn't end in more violence. "All right. Plan it tomorrow morning. Make it obvious." "I will." But tomorrow morning never came the way they planned. Caleb woke to the sound of gunfire. Not close, maybe 200 yards out, but unmistakable. 3 shots in rapid succession, then silence. He was out of bed and grabbing his rifle before fully conscious, his heart hammering. Evelyn appeared at his door, fully dressed despite the hour. "They're testing us," she said, "seeing how we react." "React to what?" More gunshots, closer this time. Something shattered, glass breaking. Caleb ran to the front room and found the window blown out, night air rushing in cold and sharp. "Get down!" Evelyn shouted. They dropped as another volley tore through the cabin. Wood splintered. The lamp on the table exploded in a spray of oil and glass. Caleb's ears rang from the concussion. "How many?" he gasped. "At least 4. Multiple positions." Evelyn crawled to the broken window, staying low. "They're trying to pin us down, keep us from getting to the barn." "Why the barn?" "The horses. They want us trapped here." Rage cut through Caleb's fear. They were going after his animals, the horses that trusted him, that depended on him for protection. He started to rise, but Evelyn grabbed his shoulder. "Not yet. They want you running out there panicked. That's when they'll take you." She pulled her revolver. "We go together, covering fire, fast and controlled." "I can't let them hurt my horses." "Then help me get to them before that happens." Another burst of gunfire raked the cabin. Caleb heard hooves screaming in the barn, his animals terrified, trapped, with bullets flying. Something broke inside him. Not panic, something colder and harder. "Back door," he said. "Less exposure." "Good." Evelyn moved quickly. "On 3. You go left toward the barn. I'll go right and draw their attention. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get those horses out." "What about you?" "I've done this before. Trust me." She counted down. At 3, they burst out the back door into cold darkness. Caleb ran low and fast, zigzagging like he'd seen soldiers do in old photographs. Gunfire erupted behind him, Evelyn returning fire, her shots precise and spaced. He heard shouting, the sound of men moving position. He reached the barn and threw open the door. His horses were wild with fear, crashing against their stalls. He moved quickly, opening gates, slapping flanks, driving them toward the rear exit that led to the pasture. They needed no encouragement, bolting into the darkness and safety. Outside, the gunfire continued. Caleb grabbed his Winchester and moved to the barn door, looking for targets. He saw muzzle flashes in 3 locations: the tree line, behind his wagon, near the chicken coop. 4 shooters, like Evelyn had said. He found Coleman behind the wagon and fired. Not to kill, he aimed low, at the wheels and frame. Splinters flew. Coleman dove away, cursing. Caleb worked the lever and fired again, keeping the man pinned. From the cabin, Evelyn's revolver barked steadily. Caleb saw one of the shooters break position and run. She tracked him with careful shots, not hitting but driving him back, disrupting their coordination. Then he heard her scream. It wasn't pain, it was warning. Caleb spun and saw a 5th man rushing the barn, rifle raised. No time to aim properly. He fired from the hip, the Winchester bucking hard. The shot went wide, but the man stumbled, surprised. Caleb worked the lever and fired again. This time he didn't miss. The man went down hard, clutching his leg, his rifle clattering away. Not dead. Wounded. Caleb's stomach lurched, but he pushed it away. He'd chosen not to kill, aimed low deliberately, but he'd still shot a man. "Caleb!" Evelyn's voice cut through his shock. "Fall back! To me!" He ran from the barn as more gunfire erupted. The remaining shooters were closing in, trying to flank his position. He made it to the cabin and dove through the back door, Evelyn slamming it shut behind him. "You hit?" she asked quickly. "No, you?" "I'm fine." She was bleeding from a cut on her cheek, glass or splinter, he couldn't tell. "You got one of them." "I didn't kill him." "I know, I saw." She grabbed his shoulders. "Listen to me. They're going to regroup. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they rush the cabin. We need to decide, make a stand here, or get out." "Get out where?" "Into the woods. We know this land better than they do. We can lose them in the dark." She looked around the cabin. "But if we leave, they'll burn it, destroy everything." Caleb thought about his home, the walls he'd built, the life he'd carved out of wilderness and work. Losing it would hurt worse than any bullet, but staying meant dying. "We leave," he said. "House can be rebuilt. We can't." Evelyn nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Gather what you can't replace. 30 seconds." They moved fast. Caleb grabbed Margaret's letters, his father's pocket watch, a photograph of his mother. Evelyn took her saddlebags and ammunition. Everything else, furniture, tools, supplies, they left. They slipped out as the gunfire resumed. The men were probing, testing positions, trying to find them. Caleb and Evelyn moved quickly through the darkness, using every scrap of cover, heading for the dense timber to the east. Behind them, the cabin took more hits, glass shattered, wood splintered. Caleb heard Coleman shouting orders, coordinating the assault. They thought their targets were still inside, pinned down and desperate. They were halfway to the tree line when someone spotted them. A shout went up. Gunfire followed, kicking up dirt and snapping through branches. Caleb ran harder than he'd ever run, his lungs burning, his legs pumping. Beside him, Evelyn moved like a shadow, fast and sure. They made the trees as bullets chewed bark. Evelyn spun and fired 3 quick shots, forcing their pursuers to take cover. Then they were in the woods, darkness swallowing them, the terrain turning treacherous with roots and rocks. "Keep moving," Evelyn gasped. "Don't stop." They ran blind, trusting instinct and desperate momentum. Behind them, Caleb heard men crashing through brush, shouting to each other. The pursuit was organized, determined. These weren't amateurs playing at intimidation. They were professionals who'd escalated to violence and wouldn't stop until the job was finished. A gunshot cracked close enough to feel the air displacement. Caleb stumbled but caught himself. Evelyn grabbed his arm, pulling him behind a massive fallen oak. They pressed against the rotting wood, breathing hard, listening. Footsteps. Coming closer. At least 2 men, maybe 3, spreading out to flank their position. Caleb's hands shook as he checked his Winchester. 4 rounds left. Not enough if this turned into a sustained fight. Evelyn's revolver was in her hand, her face set with cold concentration. She gestured. "Stay quiet. Let them pass if possible." Fighting was last resort. The footsteps came closer. Caleb could hear breathing now, the soft crunch of boots on frost-hardened ground. One of the men said something low that he couldn't make out. Another responded with a grunt. They were going to walk right past. Then Caleb's foot slipped on wet leaves. Just a small sound, a whisper of movement. But it was enough. "There!" someone shouted. Gunfire erupted. Splinters exploded from the log above Caleb's head. Evelyn rose and fired twice, precise shots that made one pursuer scream and fall. Caleb added his own fire, levering and shooting, trying to create enough chaos to break contact. "Move!" Evelyn shouted. They ran again, deeper into the woods, the darkness both protection and danger. Caleb's boot caught on a root and he went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands. He scrambled to retrieve it as footsteps pounded closer. A figure appeared through the trees. Caleb's hand found his rifle, swung it up. The figure raised a gun. Time slowed to amber. Evelyn's shot hit the man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He fell cursing into the brush. She grabbed Caleb's coat and hauled him up. "Go! Go!" They ran until Caleb's lungs felt like they'd burst, ran until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Ran until the woods opened onto a rocky creek bed that he recognized, the northern boundary of his property, miles from the ranch. They collapsed behind a boulder, gasping for air, shaking with adrenaline. In the distance, faint against the night sky, Caleb saw orange light growing. His cabin was burning. He watched it with a hollow feeling in his chest. Everything he'd built, 5 years of work, gone in one night because of greed and men who thought violence was negotiation. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said quietly. "Not your fault." "It is. They came because of me, because I brought this to your door." Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd stood beside him when bullets flew, who'd saved his life twice in the last hour, who looked at his burning home with genuine grief in her eyes. "You didn't bring this," he said. "They did, and they're going to answer for it." "Answer to who? The law?" She shook her head. "Coleman and his men will be gone by morning. Vance will claim ignorance. There's no proof, no witnesses, no justice that'll come from this." "Then what?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Then we stop waiting for them to come to us. We take the fight to them." "How?" "By going to where this started. Blackstone Valley. To the claim that's causing all this trouble." Her jaw set hard. "Margaret can't fight for her inheritance, but we can. We make it public, make it legal, make it impossible for Vance and his investors to touch. And then this ends. Caleb thought about it. About riding away from his burned ranch, from everything he'd known. About pursuing men who'd tried to kill him into unfamiliar territory with nothing but an armed woman and righteous anger for protection. It was insane. It was also the only path forward he could see. "How far is Blackstone Valley?" he asked. "2 days' hard ride, if we leave now. My horses scattered when I freed them. Then we walk until we find them, or we steal mounts from Coleman's men." She checked her revolver, reloading with steady hands. "Either way, we're not staying here. They'll come back with more men to make sure we're dead." Caleb looked one last time at the orange glow that had been his home. Everything he'd built, everything he'd hoped for, reduced to flames and ash by men who'd never set foot in an honest day's work. But he was still alive. Evelyn was alive. And Margaret's claim was still out there, waiting to be protected. "Let's go," he said. They moved through the darkness, following the creek north, away from the burning ranch and the men who hunted them. Caleb didn't look back again. There was nothing behind him now but destruction. Ahead was only the uncertain promise of morning and whatever justice they could carve out of a world that seemed determined to deny it. They found 2 of Caleb's horses at dawn, grazing nervously in a ravine 3 miles north of the ranch. The animals were skittish, still frightened from the gunfire, but they recognized Caleb's voice and let him approach. He murmured soft words while fashioning makeshift halters from rope Evelyn carried in her saddlebag. Neither horse was saddled, but they'd ridden bareback before when necessity demanded it. The sun rose pale and cold, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Caleb's body ached from running, from fear, from the weight of watching everything he'd built turn to ash. His hands were cut from scrambling through brush in the dark, his clothes torn and filthy. But he was alive, and that felt like both a gift and a burden. Evelyn looked worse than he felt. The cut on her cheek had crusted over with dried blood, and exhaustion hollowed her eyes. She hadn't complained once through the night, had kept them moving with quiet determination, checking their back trail constantly for signs of pursuit. Now she leaned against a boulder, reloading her revolver with movements that had become automatic. "We should rest," Caleb said. "Few hours at least." "Can't. Coleman knows these woods by now. If he's smart, he'll have men tracking us at first light." She holstered the gun and looked at the horses. "We need to put distance between us and Cedar Ridge, fast as these animals can carry us. They need water first, and so do we." Evelyn nodded toward a thin stream cutting through the ravine. "Make it quick." They let the horses drink while filling their canteens. Caleb splashed freezing water on his face, trying to wash away the smoke smell that clung to his skin and clothes. It didn't work. He could still smell the burning, still see the orange flames consuming his cabin. The image was burned into his mind deeper than any scar. "You ever lose everything before?" he asked quietly. Evelyn was silent for a moment. "Twice? Once when I was young, once a few years back." "How'd you handle it?" "Poorly the first time, better the second." She met his eyes. "You don't get over it. You just decide whether it breaks you or makes you harder." "I don't want to be harder." "Then be smarter. Use the anger, but don't let it use you." She stood, brushing dirt from her trousers. Men like Vance and Coleman count on people being too scared or too broken to fight back. Prove them wrong. They mounted the horses and rode north, following game trails and creek beds, staying off the main roads where pursuit would come easiest. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the hills, pine forests giving way to rocky outcrops and steep ravines. It was hard country, beautiful in its severity, and it swallowed them like the land itself was offering protection. By mid-morning, they'd covered 10 miles. Caleb's thighs burned from gripping the horse's barrel without a saddle, but he pushed the discomfort away. Pain meant he was still moving, still fighting. He could handle pain. "Tell me about Blackstone Valley," he said as they paused to rest the horses on a ridge overlooking miles of wilderness. "Mining town. Grew up fast when they struck silver last year. Maybe 2,000 people now, half of them prospectors and claim jumpers." Evelyn scanned the horizon behind them, looking for dust or movement. "Rough place. Law exists, but it's stretched thin. The kind of town where money talks louder than justice." "Sounds welcoming." "It's not. But it's also where the territorial land office is, where claims get registered and disputes get settled." She looked at him. We get there. We make Margaret's claim official and public. Force it into the legal system where Vance's investors can't just burn it away. What if they've already done that, filed false claims, or paid off officials? Then we expose them, make enough noise that territorial authorities have to investigate. Evelyn's voice was hard. These men operate in shadows because light is dangerous for them. We bring light. With what proof? Our word against theirs? With the truth about what happened at your ranch. With the documentation I filed showing Margaret's legitimate inheritance. With testimony from Sheriff Brennan that Vance's men were asking questions before your property burned. She ticked off points on her fingers. It's not much, but it's enough to create doubt. And doubt makes investors nervous. Caleb wanted to believe it would be that simple, but nothing about this had been simple so far. They rode through the afternoon, pushing the horses as hard as they dared without breaking them. The land gradually descended from rocky highlands into rolling hills covered with scrub oak and juniper. By evening, they reached a small settlement, barely more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings, where Evelyn traded one of her silver dollars for food and information. The trader, a leathery man with suspicious eyes, asked few questions but provided valuable intelligence. A group of riders had come through that morning, heading north. Well-armed men asking about a rancher and a woman traveling together. The trader had told them nothing, but his expression made it clear he'd remember Caleb and Evelyn's faces. "They're still hunting us," Caleb said as they made camp in a sheltered draw a mile from the settlement. "Of course they are. We shot one of their men, escaped their ambush, made them look incompetent." Evelyn built a small fire, keeping it low and shielded from distant view. "They'll push hard until they find us or we reach Blackstone Valley. Whichever comes first." "And if they find us first?" "Then we fight. Again." She said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. "But we've got advantages now. We know they're coming. We're moving toward help instead of waiting isolated, and we're both still armed." Caleb checked his Winchester. 6 rounds left after the firefight. Not much for a running battle. "I need ammunition. Trading post tomorrow if we pass another. Otherwise we make what we have count." Evelyn pulled dried meat from her saddlebag and divided it evenly. "Eat. Sleep in shifts. We leave before dawn." They ate in silence, exhaustion settling over them like a heavy blanket. Caleb took the first watch while Evelyn wrapped herself in her coat and fell asleep almost instantly, the kind of immediate unconsciousness that came from training your body to rest whenever possible. He sat with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. An owl called somewhere distant. The horses shuffled and breathed. The fire crackled softly. Everything was peaceful on the surface, but Caleb felt the tension underneath, the knowledge that violent men were somewhere out there, searching, closing the distance. He thought about Margaret, sick in Philadelphia, probably unaware that her simple inheritance had turned into this nightmare. He wondered if she'd blame herself when she found out, if she'd regret sending Evelyn, regret ever writing those letters to a rancher she'd never met. He hoped she wouldn't. Whatever happened now, Caleb had made his own choices. He could have sent Evelyn away that first night, could have stayed neutral when Vance came asking questions, could have run when the bullets started flying, but he hadn't. And somewhere in the chaos and violence of the past week, he'd stopped doing this for Margaret and started doing it for something else. For the principle that men shouldn't be able to burn a person's life down just because they wanted something that person had. For the idea that standing your ground mattered even when the odds were terrible. Maybe especially when the odds were terrible. "You're thinking too loud," Evelyn murmured without opening her eyes. "I can hear it from here." "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "I wasn't asleep, just resting." She sat up, her face shadowed by firelight. "What's on your mind?" "Wondering if we're doing the right thing, running toward more trouble instead of away from it." "Having doubts?" "Wouldn't you?" "Every day." Evelyn poked the fire with a stick. "But doubt doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it just means you're smart enough to understand consequences." "What are the consequences here?" "If we succeed, Margaret keeps her claim. Vance and his investors learn they can't just take what they want. Maybe some justice gets served." She paused. "If we fail, we're probably dead and nothing changes. That's a hell of a gamble." "It's the only one we've got." She looked at him steadily. "You want to turn back? I won't judge you for it. You didn't ask for any of this. Caleb thought about it, really thought about riding away, finding some other town, starting over somewhere far from silver claims and armed men. It would be easier, safer, smarter, probably, but it would also mean letting them win, letting them burn his ranch and walk away unpunished, letting Margaret fight alone from a sickbed against people who'd already shown they'd use violence without hesitation. No, he said. We keep going. Evelyn smiled faintly. Good, because I was lying. I would have judged you. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. Noted. They rode out before the sun fully cleared the horizon, their breath fogging in the cold morning air. The land continued to roll and descend, leading them toward the valley where Blackstone sat like a scar on the wilderness. By afternoon, they would see smoke on the horizon, the accumulated exhaust of 2,000 people living and working in close quarters. They also saw riders behind them. Evelyn spotted them first, 3 dark shapes maybe 2 miles back, moving with the purposeful pace of men who knew their quarry was ahead. She cursed under her breath and urged her horse faster. Can we outrun them? Caleb asked. Not without killing these horses, and we'll need them when we get to town. Her jaw was tight. We need to lose them or slow them down. How? She scanned the terrain ahead. There. That canyon. Narrow passage, lots of cover. We can bottleneck them, make them think twice about pressing. They turned off the trail and rode hard for the canyon entrance. It was exactly as Evelyn described, a slash in the rock barely wide enough for 2 horses, with walls rising 30 feet on either side. Perfect ambush territory. You thinking what I'm thinking? Caleb asked as they dismounted. Depends. Are you thinking we take positions on either side, let them ride in, and persuade them that pursuing us further is a bad idea? That's exactly what I'm thinking. Then yes. Evelyn grabbed her rifle from her saddle. No killing unless they force it. Just scare them. Make them respect the cost of catching us. They climbed the canyon walls, finding positions with good sight lines and cover. Caleb's hands were steadier than he expected as he checked his rifle. The fear was still there, cold in his gut, but it was controlled now. Manageable. He'd been shot at enough in the past week that it was starting to feel almost normal. Almost. The riders appeared 10 minutes later, slowing as they approached the canyon. They weren't stupid. They knew this was dangerous ground, but they also knew their quarry was close, and that made men take risks they'd normally avoid. Coleman was leading them. Caleb recognized his shape, his posture, the flat-brimmed hat. The man sat his horse with casual confidence, scanning the canyon walls with experienced eyes. I know you're up there, Coleman called. Saw your tracks, clear as day. You're trapped. From across the canyon, Evelyn's voice rang out. Trapped? We chose this ground. You're the ones riding into a bottleneck. Coleman smiled. 2 against 3. You can't cover all angles. We don't need to cover all angles, just need to make you bleed enough that catching us stops being worth it. Evelyn's rifle barrel appeared over her rock, pointing down. Your call, Coleman. Ride away, and tell Vance you lost our trail. Or push forward and see which of you gets shot first. Mr. Vance doesn't accept failure. Then Vance can ride out here himself. But you? You're hired help. Is this job really worth dying for? One of the other riders shifted nervously. Caleb could see the calculation happening. How much were they being paid versus the very real possibility of taking a bullet in this lonely canyon where nobody would find their bodies for weeks? Coleman sensed his men's hesitation. We've got orders, and we've got high ground and nothing to lose. Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clearly. You burned my ranch, shot at me, drove me from my home. You really think I won't pull this trigger? The words hung in the air. Coleman's smile faded as he reassessed the situation. These weren't scared rabbits anymore. They were cornered animals willing to bite. This isn't over, Coleman said finally. No, Evelyn agreed. But it's over for today. Turn around, ride back. Tell Vance if he wants Margaret's claim, he can negotiate like a civilized man instead of sending thugs to murder people in the night. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Coleman yanked his horse's head around and spurred back the way they'd come. His men followed quickly, clearly relieved to be leaving. Caleb and Evelyn waited until the riders disappeared completely before climbing down. Caleb's legs were shaking from adrenaline and relief. We're not done with them, Evelyn said. I know. They'll be waiting in Blackstone Valley, probably with more men. I know that too. And we're still going. Caleb mounted his horse. We're still going. They rode the final miles to Blackstone Valley as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The town appeared gradually, first scattered tents and crude shelters on the outskirts, then permanent structures crowding together in chaotic disorder, then finally a main street lined with false-fronted buildings that tried to project civilization onto wilderness. The noise hit them before they entered town proper. Hammers and saws, shouting men, the clank of mining equipment being loaded and unloaded. Somewhere a piano played badly, competing with drunken singing from a saloon. The whole place had the fevered energy of people chasing fortune and losing themselves in the pursuit. Stay close, Evelyn said as they rode down the main street, and watch for Vance's men. They'll be here. The Territorial Land Office sat at the end of the street, a solid stone building that looked permanent compared to the wooden structures around it. Government presence, declaring that law existed even in this rough place. Caleb felt a small measure of hope seeing it. They tied their horses and climbed the steps. Inside, the office was surprisingly orderly, filing cabinets lining the walls, a large desk where a clerk sat working through paperwork, maps showing the valley's claims pinned to every available surface. The clerk looked up as they entered. He was young, maybe 25, with ink-stained fingers and the careful expression of someone who'd learned to be neutral in a town where tempers ran hot. "Help you?" he asked. "We need to verify a claim," Evelyn said. "Margaret Hale. Land inherited from her uncle, Marcus Hale. Should have been registered within the last month." The clerk consulted his ledgers, flipping pages with practiced efficiency. "Hale. Yes. Registered 3 weeks ago. 100 acres, grid coordinates." He rattled off numbers that meant nothing to Caleb. "Everything's in order. Was there a problem?" "We need confirmation of the registration. Something official. In writing." Evelyn leaned on the desk. "And we need to know if anyone else has tried to file claims on that same land." "Let me check the challenge log." More page flipping. The clerk frowned. "There's a notation here. A group calling themselves the Blackstone Valley Development Consortium filed a dispute 2 weeks ago, claimed prior mineral rights based on an older survey." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "Means they're trying to invalidate Miss Hale's claim through legal channels." The clerk looked apologetic. "The dispute's scheduled for territorial court hearing in 3 days. Miss Hale would need to be present or have legal representation." "She can't be present. She's ill." "Then she needs representation. Otherwise, the claim could be awarded to the consortium by default." Evelyn's hands tightened on the desk edge. "Who filed the dispute?" "Legal firm out of Denver, acting on behalf of..." The clerk checked his notes. 3 investors, names are Richard Vance, Thomas Kellerman, and James Brackett. There it was. The confirmation they'd needed but dreaded. Vance wasn't just investigating anymore. He was actively trying to steal Margaret's inheritance through legal manipulation. "Can we fight it?" Caleb asked. "You'd need a lawyer, someone familiar with territorial mining law." The clerk pulled out a document. "I can give you the official registration certificate for Miss Hale's claim. That proves she has legitimate ownership, but without representation at the hearing, that might not matter." "Give us the certificate," Evelyn said. While the clerk prepared the paperwork, Caleb stepped to the window overlooking the street. The sun was nearly down now, painting the rough town in shades of amber and shadow. People moved about their business, miners, merchants, women carrying baskets. Normal life happening while beneath the surface, battles over money and property played out with deadly stakes. Movement caught his eye. 3 men entering a building across the street. One of them was Richard Vance. "Evelyn," Caleb said quietly. She joined him at the window, saw what he was seeing. Her expression went cold. "He's here, setting up his legal assault while sending Coleman to kill us on the trail." She watched the building where Vance had disappeared. "He's covering both options. If violence works, great. If not, he'll steal the claim through court proceedings." "We can't let him do that." "We won't." Evelyn took the certificate from the clerk and folded it carefully. "But we need help. A lawyer who'll fight for Margaret's rights." "You know any lawyers in Blackstone Valley?" No, but I know how to find one who'll work for the right reasons. She headed for the door. Come on. They spent the next 2 hours canvassing the town's legal offices. Most lawyers turned them away immediately when they heard they'd be opposing the Blackstone Valley Development Consortium. Two quoted fees that Caleb couldn't afford, even if his ranch hadn't burned. One suggested they settle for whatever Vance's investors offered and count themselves lucky. By the time full darkness fell, Caleb's hope was wearing thin. Maybe we should just expose what they did, he said, as they stood in an alley catching their breath. Tell the territorial marshal about the attack on my ranch. Force an investigation. That takes time. Weeks, maybe months. The court hearing is in 3 days. Evelyn leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally showing through her controlled exterior. By the time any investigation concludes, Vance will have the claim and Margaret will have nothing. Then what do we do? We find leverage. She pushed off the wall. Something that makes Vance's investors nervous enough to withdraw their challenge. Something that threatens them more than losing this claim matters. Like what? Like proof that they hired men to commit arson and attempted murder. Like testimony from a sheriff that they were asking suspicious questions before a ranch burned. Like making their names public in connection with violence. Evelyn's eyes were hard. Rich men care about reputation. Threaten that, and they might reconsider how badly they want this silver. Caleb thought about it. We'd need to prove they gave the orders. Coleman won't testify against them. No, but we might find someone who will. She started walking. The men who attacked your ranch were hired locally. Somebody in this town knows who recruited them and why. We find that person, we get our leverage. They spent the night in a cheap boarding house, taking turns sleeping while the other watched the door. Caleb barely rested, his mind churning through possibilities and fears. In 3 days, Margaret's claim would be decided. 3 days to find evidence, build a case, and force men with money and power to back down. It seemed impossible. But then, so had surviving the attack on his ranch. So had making it to Blackstone Valley with Coleman hunting them. Impossible was starting to feel like just another obstacle to work around. Morning came gray and cold. Caleb woke to find Evelyn already dressed, her face set with determination. I found something, she said. What? A saloon girl who saw Coleman recruiting men for a job a week ago. Said he was offering good money for property work near Cedar Ridge. Evelyn pulled on her coat. She'll talk, for a price. How much? More than we have, but she'll accept trade. What kind of trade? Evelyn showed him a small leather pouch. Inside were 3 pieces of jewelry, a ring, a bracelet, a necklace. Simple but real gold, worth maybe $50 together. Where'd you get those? Caleb asked. Payment from a job 2 years back. Saved them for emergencies. She closed the pouch. This qualifies. They met the saloon girl, a tired woman named Rose who'd seen too much of life's ugly side, in a back room of the Silver Queen Saloon. She accepted Evelyn's jewelry without counting it and told them everything she knew. Coleman had come through 10 days ago looking for men willing to do rough work. He'd been specific, ranchers or former soldiers, people who knew how to shoot and wouldn't ask questions. He'd hired 4 men that Rose knew of, paid them $20 up front with promises of more when the job was finished. One of those men was her cousin, a drifter named Jack who'd spent time in territorial prison for assault. Jack said they were going to scare some rancher into cooperating, Rose told them. Said it was just intimidation, but Jack's not smart enough to scare anybody without it turning violent. Where can we find him? Evelyn asked. He's got a tent on the north edge of town, but he won't talk to you. He's loyal to whoever pays him. Everyone talks eventually. Evelyn stood. Thank you, Rose. They found Jack's tent an hour later. He was exactly what Rose described, a hard-faced man with prison tattoos and violent eyes. He came out of his tent with a knife already in hand when Caleb called his name. Who's asking? Jack growled. The rancher you tried to burn out of his home, Caleb said. Jack's expression flickered, surprise, then calculation. His grip on the knife tightened. Don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Coleman hired you. $20 to help attack my ranch. Caleb kept his hand near his gun. You shot my cabin to pieces, burned it down, nearly killed me and the woman standing here. Prove it. Don't need to prove it. Just need you to tell the territorial court what Coleman hired you for and who he was working for. Jack laughed, harsh and bitter. I ain't testifying against nobody, especially not men with money. Not even for your freedom? Evelyn said quietly. Jack's laugh died. What? Arson, attempted murder. Those are territorial crimes. Prison time. Maybe hanging if the judge is feeling harsh. Evelyn's voice was cold. Or you could testify. Tell the truth about who hired you and why, in exchange for immunity. There's no immunity. I'd be admitting to crimes. Crimes you committed under orders from men who manipulated you. That makes you a tool, not a criminal mastermind. Evelyn stepped closer. But if you don't cooperate, you're the only one we can prove was there. Coleman's smart enough to have kept his distance. Vance has lawyers. You've got nothing but a knife and a criminal record. Jack's face went pale as understanding hit. He'd been used, and now he was expendable. They'll kill me if I talk, he said. They'll kill you anyway once you're not useful, Caleb said. At least this way you've got a chance. The calculation played across Jack's face, self-preservation warring with fear of retribution. Finally, slowly, he lowered the knife. What do you want me to say? He asked. They took Jack to the territorial marshal's office and laid out everything. The attack on Caleb's ranch, Coleman's recruitment of violent men, the connection to Richard Vance and the consortium trying to steal Margaret's claim. The marshal, a weathered man named Carson, who'd seen enough corruption to recognize it when presented clearly, listened with growing anger. You're telling me respected businessmen hired thugs to burn out a rancher over a mining dispute? Carson asked. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Caleb said. Carson looked at Jack. And you'll testify to this? If I get immunity, yeah. I'll tell the court everything. Immunity depends on the prosecutor and the judge. I can't promise that. Carson stood and grabbed his hat. But I can damn sure make sure this information reaches the territorial court before that hearing in 3 days. And I can bring Vance and Coleman in for questioning. Be careful, Evelyn warned. These men are dangerous. So am I. Carson checked his gun. You two stay somewhere safe. I'll send word when I need you. They left the marshal's office feeling something they hadn't felt in days. Not quite hope, but close to it. The beginnings of justice taking shape. But as they walked back toward their boarding house, Caleb saw Coleman across the street, watching them with cold, furious eyes. The man had seen them enter the marshal's office. He knew what they'd done, and his hand was already moving toward his gun. Evelyn, Caleb said quietly. She saw Coleman the same moment Caleb did. Her hand dropped to her revolver as Coleman drew his weapon with practiced speed. The street erupted into chaos as gunshots shattered the evening air. Evelyn moved first, shoving Caleb hard toward the nearest building as Coleman's bullet whined past where his head had been a heartbeat before. She dropped and rolled, her own revolver clearing leather with fluid precision, returning fire as people on the street screamed and scattered. Caleb hit the ground behind a water trough, his Winchester coming up instinctively. He saw Coleman duck behind a wagon, saw 2 more men emerging from the building behind him, the same men who'd ridden with him in the canyon. This wasn't a chance encounter. They'd been waiting, watching, ready to silence the witnesses before Jack's testimony could reach the right ears. Get inside, Evelyn shouted, firing twice more to keep Coleman pinned. Through the store! Caleb didn't argue. He scrambled backward and crashed through the door of the general store behind him, sending the shopkeeper diving for cover with a terrified yelp. Evelyn came in right behind him, slamming the door as bullets chewed through the wooden frame. Back exit? She demanded. The shopkeeper pointed with a shaking hand toward a rear door. They ran for it as the front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass. Outside they could hear shouting, Coleman coordinating his men, spreading them out to cover all exits. Professional, methodical, deadly. They burst out the back into an alley littered with trash and broken crates. Caleb looked both ways, trying to orient himself in this unfamiliar town. Left led deeper into the commercial district. Right led toward the edge of town and open ground. Left, Evelyn said, reading his hesitation. We need witnesses, crowds. Make it harder for them to shoot without consequences. They ran left, boots pounding on packed earth, their breath coming hard. Behind them, Caleb heard pursuit, boots on wood, men shouting directions. Coleman's voice rising above the rest, cold and commanding. They emerged onto a side street crowded with miners heading to evening shifts. Evelyn grabbed Caleb's arm and pulled him into the flow of people, forcing them to slow to a fast walk. Drawing guns now would cause panic, and panic would clear the street of the protection they needed. "Split up," Evelyn said quietly. "You head for the marshal's office. I'll draw them off." "No." "Caleb." "No, we stay together." He met her eyes. "You've kept me alive this long. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." For a second he thought she'd argue. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then we need to end this. Fast and permanent." "How?" "We take it to Vance, force him to call off his dogs, or face the consequences in front of the whole town." Her eyes were hard. "Where's he staying?" "Hotel. The big one on Main Street." "Then that's where we go." They worked their way through the crowded streets toward the Blackstone Hotel, the finest building in town. 3 stories of painted wood trying to look like something grander than it was. Caleb kept checking behind them, catching glimpses of Coleman and his men moving parallel, trying to anticipate their destination. The hotel lobby was surprisingly refined. Carpet on the floor, oil paintings on the walls, a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. A dozen people moved through the space, guests and staff, creating witnesses that made Caleb feel fractionally safer. The desk clerk looked up with professional hospitality that froze when he saw their disheveled appearance and the weapons they carried. "Can I help you?" "Richard Vance," Evelyn said. "What room?" "I can't give out that information." Evelyn slapped money on the desk, the last of her silver dollars. "What room?" The clerk swallowed and checked his ledger with shaking hands. "Suite 12, top floor. But you can't just—" They were already moving for the stairs. Caleb took them 2 at a time, his heart hammering not from exertion, but from the certainty that this was about to get worse before it got better. Behind them he heard shouting in the lobby, Coleman arriving, demanding to know where they'd gone. Suite 12 sat at the end of a carpeted hallway. Evelyn didn't knock, just kicked the door open with enough force to tear it halfway off its hinges. The sitting room beyond was expensively furnished, and Richard Vance sat at a writing desk looking up with perfect composure that barely disguised his shock. "Miss Pierce." "Mr. Morgan." Vance set down his pen carefully. "This is unexpected." "Call them off," Evelyn said, her revolver pointed steady at his chest. "Coleman and his men, right now." "I don't know what you're talking about." "They just tried to kill us in the street, after they burned my ranch and tried to murder me in my sleep." Caleb's voice shook with controlled rage. "You sent them. You paid them. And now you're going to stop them, or I'm going to put a bullet in you and let the law sort it out later." Vance's composure cracked slightly. "You're making serious accusations without proof." "We have proof. Jack Tomlin is testifying to the territorial marshal right now, telling him everything about how you hired Coleman to intimidate us, how it escalated to arson and attempted murder." Evelyn moved closer. "You wanted Margaret's claim badly enough to kill for it. That's going to look very bad for your investors when it comes out in court. Jack Tomlin is a convicted criminal. His word means nothing." "Maybe, but Sheriff Brennan's testimony about your men asking questions before my ranch burned, that means something. The fact that you're here in Blackstone Valley filing legal challenges while your hired thugs are shooting at us in the street, that creates a pattern." Caleb raised his Winchester. "You're done, Vance. The only question is whether you walk away or get carried out." Footsteps pounded in the hallway. Coleman burst through the broken door with his men behind him, guns drawn. The room became a frozen tableau, everyone armed, everyone pointing weapons at someone else. A single wrong move away from a massacre. "Drop them," Coleman said, his gun aimed at Evelyn's head. "Can't do that," Evelyn replied, not looking away from Vance. "Then everybody dies." "Not everybody." Evelyn's voice was ice cold. "Vance dies first. Then you die. Maybe we die after that. But you two are definitely dead. Is that what you want, Coleman? To die for a paycheck?" Coleman's jaw tightened. Caleb could see the calculation happening. The same calculation he'd seen in the canyon. How much was this job worth versus the certainty of a bullet? "Mr. Vance," Coleman said, "your call." Vance sat very still, looking at the weapons pointed at him, at the determination in Evelyn's eyes. He was a man used to winning through money and influence, not violence. And right now, violence was the only currency that mattered. "Lower your weapons," he said quietly. "Sir." "Lower them, Coleman. That's an order." Coleman hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun. His men followed suit reluctantly. The tension didn't break. Everyone was still coiled tight, ready to explode, but the immediate threat of death receded slightly. "Smart choice," Evelyn said. "Now here's what happens next. You withdraw your legal challenge to Margaret Hale's claim. You and your investors issue a public statement saying you made a mistake, that the claim is legitimate, and you have no further interest in it. And if I refuse? Then Marshal Carson arrests you for conspiracy to commit arson and attempted murder. Jack's testimony puts Coleman at the scene. Coleman's connection to you is documented. Your legal challenge happening simultaneously with violence against the claim holder? That's enough for indictment. Maybe not conviction, but enough to destroy your reputation and tie you up in territorial court for years." Evelyn's smile was razor thin. "Your choice. Walk away clean or fight charges that'll cost you more than any silver claim is worth." Vance's hands clenched on the desk. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. The investment we've made in this region is legal or it isn't," Caleb interrupted. "If it's legal, you don't need Margaret's claim. If it isn't, then you're already in deeper trouble than we can cause." He lowered his rifle slightly. "I'm not asking you to lose money, Vance. I'm asking you to stop trying to steal what isn't yours." Silence filled the room. Somewhere outside, a piano played badly, the sound drifting through broken windows. Normal life continuing while destinies hung in balance. Finally, Vance pulled out paper and pen. "I'll need assurances. Written testimony that we were never here, that Coleman acted independently." "No," Evelyn said flatly. "You withdraw the challenge and cease all harassment. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges. But Coleman testifies honestly about who hired him, and that testimony stays on record as insurance. If you ever come after Margaret or her claim again, it all becomes public. That's blackmail. That's consequences. Learn the difference." Vance's pen moved across paper with sharp, angry strokes. He wrote for several minutes, then signed with a flourish and held out the document. "Written withdrawal of our legal challenge. Notarized statement that we have no claim to Margaret Hale's property. Satisfaction?" Evelyn took the paper, read it carefully, then folded it into her coat. "Coleman, your gun. On the desk. Like hell. You tried to kill us multiple times. You burned a man's home. You shot at us in a public street." Evelyn's voice was diamond hard. "You're going to the marshal to give testimony. You do it voluntary or you do it in chains, but either way you're confessing to what you did and who paid you to do it." Coleman looked at Vance. The wealthy man wouldn't meet his eyes. Understanding crossed Coleman's face, the realization that he'd been a tool, now discarded. His loyalty had been purchased, not earned, and it had value only as long as he was useful. Slowly, reluctantly, he set his gun on the desk. His men did the same. "Good," Caleb said. "Now walk, slow, to the marshal's office." They moved through the hotel in a strange procession, Coleman and his men in front, disarmed and defeated, Caleb and Evelyn behind with weapons ready. The lobby had filled with onlookers drawn by the earlier commotion. Whispers followed them as they passed. Marshal Carson met them in the street, having heard the gunfire and come running with deputies. His expression when he saw Coleman disarmed and compliant was pure satisfaction. "Got something to tell me, Coleman?" Carson asked. "Yeah." Coleman's voice was hollow. "I got a lot to tell you." The next 2 days passed in a blur of testimony and legal proceedings. Coleman confessed to everything: the attack on Caleb's ranch, Vance's payment, the orders to intimidate, and if necessary, eliminate anyone who interfered with the consortium's claim. Jack Tomlin corroborated every detail. The evidence was overwhelming. Vance's investors, horrified by the publicity and legal exposure, immediately severed all connection to him. The consortium dissolved within 48 hours. Criminal charges were filed against Coleman and his men: arson, attempted murder, conspiracy. Vance avoided arrest only by fleeing to Denver, his reputation destroyed, his business ventures collapsing. The territorial court, presented with the withdrawal of the legal challenge and the evidence of criminal activity behind it, ruled definitively in Margaret Hale's favor. Her claim was registered as legitimate, protected, untouchable. It was over. Caleb stood outside the land office 3 days after Coleman's arrest, holding the official documentation that confirmed Margaret's ownership. The paper felt heavy in his hands, not from its physical weight, but from everything it represented. Justice, survival, the idea that doing right sometimes actually mattered. Evelyn emerged from the telegraph office across the street, a small smile on her face. Sent word to Margaret, told her it's safe, that her claim is secured and the men who came after her are facing justice. What'd she say? Won't know for a few days, but I imagine she'll be relieved. Evelyn looked at the mountains rising beyond the town, and may be grateful, though she'll probably also be horrified at what it cost. Caleb thought about his ranch. The cabin reduced to ash and charred timber. The barn collapsed. Everything he'd built for 5 years gone in a single night of violence. The loss still hurt with sharp, physical pain, but he was alive. Evelyn was alive, and they'd won against men who thought money could buy anything, including immunity from consequences. What will you do now? He asked. Move on. There's always another person who needs help, another situation that needs resolving. She looked at him. What about you? Rebuild, I guess. Go back to Cedar Ridge, start over. The words felt heavy, empty. Starting over meant returning to loneliness, to the same quiet isolation that had driven him to write those letters in the first place. Alone? Caleb met her eyes. Unless you've got a better suggestion. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. I'm not good at staying in one place, Caleb. I've tried. It never works out. Maybe you were staying in the wrong places. Maybe, she smiled faintly. Or with the wrong people. And maybe, Caleb said carefully, you've never tried staying with someone who actually understands who you are, what you do. Someone who doesn't ask you to be anything other than exactly what you are. That's a generous offer from a man whose life I turned upside down. You saved my life multiple times, stood beside me when you could have run, fought for someone who couldn't fight for herself. Caleb shifted the papers in his hands. Seems to me that's not someone who turned my life upside down. That's someone who showed me what my life was missing. Evelyn looked away, but not before he saw something vulnerable flash across her face. I don't know how to be what you're asking. I'm not asking you to be anything except present, to give staying a real chance instead of assuming it won't work. He took a step closer. Cedar Ridge needs rebuilding. That ranch isn't going to reconstruct itself. And I could use a partner who knows how to work, how to stand her ground when things get difficult. Someone who won't run when trouble comes. Trouble follows me, Caleb. It always has. Then we'll handle it together, like we handled Vance and Coleman. He held out his hand. What do you say? Want to help a rancher rebuild what got burned down? She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she took it. Her grip was firm and warm, scarred fingers fitting perfectly against his own. I'll stay, she said quietly. For a while at least. See how it feels. That's all I'm asking. They left Blackstone Valley the next morning, riding back toward Cedar Ridge with official documents securing Margaret's claim and a writ from Marshal Carson authorizing Caleb's compensation from Vance's seized assets for the destruction of his property. It wouldn't cover everything, but it was enough to rebuild, enough to start fresh. The journey took 3 days, retracing the path they'd fled in darkness and fear. Now they rode in daylight, unhurried, watching the land change as they descended from mining country back to the rolling hills and grasslands of home. They talked more than they had during the desperate ride north, about small things and large ones, about the past they'd survived and the future they might build. Sheriff Tom Brennan met them at Cedar Ridge's border, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw them alive and whole. Heard you caused quite a stir up in Blackstone, he said. Took down a whole investment consortium. Made the territorial marshal actually work for once. Just protected what belonged to a friend, Caleb said. Well, whatever you did, it worked. Got a telegram from the territorial governor's office commending the investigation and prosecution. Tom tipped his hat to Evelyn. Miss Pierce, seems I owe you an apology. You were telling the truth about everything. Most of it, anyway, Evelyn said with a slight smile. They rode through town toward what remained of the ranch. Caleb's chest tightened as they crested the final rise, and he saw it, or what was left of it. The cabin was indeed gone, just blackened foundations and scattered debris. The barn had partially collapsed, fences were burned or torn down. But the land remained. The creek still ran clear, the pastures still rolled green toward distant timber. The bones of what he'd built were still there, waiting to be made whole again. "It's going to take months to rebuild," he said. "Good thing we've got months." Evelyn dismounted and walked through the ruins, her boots crunching on charred wood. "We'll need timber for a new cabin, larger than the last one, I think. Room for 2 people to live without stepping on each other." "You're thinking long term." "I'm thinking practical." She turned to face him. "If I'm staying, really staying, then I need space that's mine, a place where I can work and think, not just a loft I'm borrowing." Caleb felt something warm expand in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the beginning of belief that loneliness might actually have an end. "We'll build it however you want," he said. They worked through the fall and into early winter, rebuilding what had burned and creating something new from the ashes. Caleb handled the heavy construction, framing walls, raising beams, fitting together the skeleton of a home. Evelyn worked beside him with surprising skill, her hands knowing wood and tools better than he'd expected. In the evenings they planned and talked, making decisions together about where things should go, how rooms should flow, what the ranch would become. The new cabin rose slowly, solidly, built to last. Larger than the first one, like Evelyn had suggested. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, windows that caught the morning light. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest work made permanent. The telegram from Margaret arrived in November, delivered by a rider from town. Evelyn read it aloud while they took a break from shingling the roof. "She's recovered, says the doctors cleared her to travel in spring if she wants." Evelyn looked up. "She's asking if the offer still stands, if there's still a place for her in Cedar Ridge." Caleb thought about the letters they'd exchanged, the partnership they'd imagined, the life that had seemed so clear before everything changed. It felt like a different person had written those words, made those plans. He'd been looking for someone to fill an empty space. Now the space wasn't empty anymore. "Tell her the truth," he said. "That things changed, that I'm glad her claim is protected and I wish her the best, but the life we talked about in letters isn't the life I'm building now." Evelyn studied his face. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He met her eyes. "Write her that if she wants to come west, Cedar Ridge will welcome her, but not as my bride. As a friend if she wants, but nothing more. She might be disappointed. She might also be relieved. Sometimes things work out different than planned, but better than expected." Evelyn smiled and began composing the response. Caleb watched her write with careful, honest words, explaining how events had unfolded, how danger had forged different bonds than letters ever could, how partnership had found him in unexpected forms. Margaret's response came 2 weeks later. She wasn't disappointed. She was grateful. For Caleb's honesty, for Evelyn's protection, for both of them fighting to secure what her uncle had left her. She was staying in Philadelphia, using the income from her claim to open her own dress shop, building a life on her own terms. She wished them well and hoped they'd find what they were looking for. It was an ending and a blessing, both, releasing everyone from obligations that no longer fit. Winter came hard that year, but the cabin held strong against the storms. Caleb and Evelyn worked through the cold months, finishing the interior, breaking horses that had returned from the hills, planning for spring planting. They developed rhythms and patterns. Who handled which chores, how they shared space, the comfortable silence of 2 people learning to work as one unit instead of 2 individuals. It wasn't romance in the traditional sense. There were no grand declarations or dramatic moments, just quiet partnership building into something deeper through shared work and mutual respect. They were building a life together with the same attention they'd built the cabin, carefully, honestly, meant to last. One evening in late winter, as they sat by the fire after a day spent mending fences, Evelyn spoke into the comfortable quiet. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Have what?" "A place. People who knew who I really was and didn't ask me to be different." She looked at him. "I spent years moving from crisis to crisis, helping people and then leaving before they could see the whole picture. before they could see the parts of me that weren't heroic or noble, just scared and tired and trying to stay one step ahead of my own past. What changed? You didn't ask me to explain myself, didn't demand my history, or require me to prove I deserve trust. She smiled softly. You just let me be who I was, and somehow that made it possible to stop running. Caleb reached over and took her hand. You saved my life, Evelyn. Stood beside me when you had every reason to walk away. Built this place with your own hands when you could have ridden on to the next problem, the next fight. He squeezed her fingers gently. If you want this to be home, then it's home. For as long as you want it. I want it, she said quietly. I think I've wanted it since the first time we stood on this porch and faced down men who thought bullets would make us submit. I just didn't know how to name it until now. Spring came eventually, bringing green grass and new calves, warming winds that carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Word spread through the territory about what had happened, the rancher and the woman who'd taken down corrupt investors and won. The story grew with each retelling, becoming legend, but the truth underneath remained solid. By summer, the ranch was fully rebuilt, better than it had been before. New barn, strong fences, a cabin that felt like a real home instead of just a shelter. And two people who'd found partnership in the crucible of violence and come out the other side stronger for it. They never married in the traditional sense. There was no ceremony, no preacher, no legal document binding them together. But they made promises to each other in their own way, to stand together when trouble came, to build something that mattered, to be honest even when honesty was hard. And they kept those promises. Years later, when travelers asked about the Morgan Ranch and the fearless woman who helped run it, locals would tell the story about how she'd arrived in leather and steel instead of lace and silk, about how she'd brought danger but also strength, about how she and Caleb had faced down men backed by money and shadow and won through courage and determination. But the part of the story that mattered most was simpler than all that. She'd arrived expecting to stay only days, maybe a week or two at most, just long enough to draw danger away from someone who couldn't fight. Instead, she'd found a reason to stop running, a place worth defending, a man worth standing beside. And in the end, the woman who'd never planned to stay became the person who'd never leave. The ranch thrived, the partnership held, and every evening, as the sun set over the north pasture painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Caleb and Evelyn would stand on their porch and watch the land they'd built together stretch out toward the horizon. Not because they were waiting for anything to arrive, but because they'd finally found what they'd been searching for all along. Home.